As we all know, there's not one thing that's not better when it's done fast.
How are you enjoying your meal?
No man's ever cooked for me before.
I love you.
I love you. Should we go upstairs?
Hey, was that good for you?
Yeah, it was great. I'll call you.
Where are you going? Like, where are you going? Where are you going? Should we test out how fast this bad boy can go? Because everything is better fast. Let's do it. Yeah! Oh yeah! God, I gotta pull over. Frick, I haven't had a ticket in so long. Okay, not everything is better when done fast, but installing Flutter certainly is. Today, we're gonna go through the fastest way to install Flutter on a Windows machine. Now, we're assuming you own either Windows 10 or 11. So if you have an older version of Windows, first, go upgrade, stop being lame. Second, the directions might vary slightly, or perhaps more than slightly for you. Okay, everybody, welcome back. Now, all joking aside, we are here to learn the quickest and fastest way to install Flutter on Windows in 2023. So the first thing we're gonna do is we're gonna open up an entirely new instance of Chrome, and we're going to open up the Flutter website. Or better yet, we're gonna search for Flutter SDK download, Windows. And when we get there, we're gonna get to the Windows install page. If you scroll slightly down, you're gonna notice a file for Flutter Windows 3.71 stable.zip. Now that we've got our file downloaded, we're gonna go to Show in Folder, and we're gonna choose the file Flutter Windows 3.71 stable. Now, you're gonna decide where you'd like to install the Flutter SDK. I generally just put it on my C drive in Flutter, and since this is just a virtual machine that I'm gonna delete upon completion of installation, I am just going to choose that path. So I'm gonna select Extract All, and then I'm gonna select the C drive. And the reason I'm gonna do this is because I just want these files to show up in C:/Flutter, because that's where I put it on all of my systems. It's just quick and easy for me. So we're just gonna select C drive. When you do this, it's automatically gonna create a folder called Flutter in the C drive that has all your Flutter files. So while we are waiting for this Flutter file to extract, we're also gonna go and download Android Studio, which is a requirement for the Flutter installation. So we're just gonna go over and Google Android Studio. We're gonna go to the Download Now option here. And we're gonna click Download Android Studio Electric Eel. If there's a different version of Android Studio out by the time you view this video, that doesn't matter. Feel free to download whatever the latest version is. So we're just gonna agree to this. I've done it a million times. So right now we're just waiting for Flutter and Android Studio to download. Okay, now while we're waiting for Android Studio to download and while we're waiting for Flutter to unzip, we are also going to go download VS Code, which is going to be our IDE of choice. I'm not saying it's the best IDE, but I'm saying it's the most accessible and easy to set up. So right now we're going to navigate to VS Code. We're just going to Google VS Code download. You can see right here, download Visual Studio Code. It is free. So we're going to Windows 11. So as you can see, Visual Studio is a very, very fast download. So we've got all the main files we need. And as you can see, Flutter is still unarchiving. While we're waiting for this to download, please in the comments leave any ideas or suggestions you might have for this channel or for ideas on future videos. As you can see, Flutter is now finished unarchiving, and now we have a Flutter folder on our C drive. So you can just take a look inside, and there's all sorts of files in here. You don't really need to worry about what any of these are. This is just the SDK. You're not actually going to be interacting with these files on a day-to-day basis. There are a couple small things we need to do. We're going to need to add Flutter to our environmental variables. Now, if you don't know what these are, basically it's just variables that you can add to your Windows operating system. So when you type out certain things, you can have paths or variables that are accessible all throughout Windows, particularly in the command prompt or in some sort of bash shell that you install later. What we're going to need to do is we're going to hit the Windows key on your keyboard. It's the fastest way to get here. You can also click search or go through your Windows start bar. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit the Windows key and I'm going to type environment. And if you notice, the first thing that comes up here is edit the system environmental variables. Part of my mumbling. We're going to click the environmental variables button here. And now if you notice, there's two sections up here. There's user variables and they're system variables. Now, unless you have a very particular reason to only install Flutter or some of this software on one user account on your machine, I would highly recommend just doing it under system. Now, if you notice here, after you've opened this up, we have a path option. We're going to modify path under system variables. We're going to click edit and we're going to go to new. Now, we know our Flutter installation on this virtual machine is located under C:/Flutter. But you have to be careful to also add /bin because that's actually where the executable files for Flutter are located. And then we're going to click OK, and we're going to click OK again. Now what we've just done is given, hopefully, our system access to the Flutter applications without having to navigate to that folder. So check this out. We're going to hit Windows key, we're going to type C&D for command prompt, and then we're going to type Flutter Doctor, which is a troubleshooting program for Flutter. Let's hit enter. Look, it's clearly detecting that Flutter exists because there's a lag here. If there wasn't this lag, it would tell us that the file was not found. So you can see it's going ahead and it's checking dependencies. Now, there's a few errors here which we're going to have to address. So the very first one, if you notice, Android toolchain developed for Android devices. It's basically telling us that we need Android Studio, which we have downloaded. If you want to bring up your Windows file manager, it's a little easier to just do Windows key and then E, and then you can navigate to wherever you'd like to go. So I'm going to go to downloads here, and I'm going to install Android Studio. Now, as with the other steps, just install Android Studio wherever you want. Now, I don't want you to get confused. Android Studio is Google's native Android development environment. It's actually based on the JetBrains IntelliJ platform. However, we're not going to do any of our coding in Android Studio, but we do need to install it because there are several important components we're going to need. Some of them are some of the Android command line utilities. We're going to need it to manage our virtual Android devices, and it's going to make sure we have an up-to-date installation of Java. So we're installing Android Studio. As before, put it wherever you'd like. Make sure you have Android virtual device selected because it's a key component. We're going to click next, and we're going to wait here for Android Studio to install. Okay, so Android Studio is installed. We're going to click next here. We're going to start Android Studio. Now there's a step that I'm going to recommend that everybody take. We're not going to import settings. If you have previous Android Studio settings, go ahead and select here. I doubt you do, but go ahead. We're going to run through these default settings. I'm going to click Don't Send. We're going to go through the wizard. We're just going to do standard for this installation. You can choose light or dark. I generally prefer dark mode on everything. Since this is not my real Windows install, I haven't changed the operating system or anything to dark mode. We are going to select the UI. And then we're going to select all these SDK components, which we don't really have a choice about. And we're going to accept all of these licenses. We're going to click Finish, and we're just going to wait for a minute. Now, this is going to be a little slower because it actually has to download some components. Sometimes I like to click Show Details just for fun. Especially if you're like at work and you want people to think that you're working, you can just bring up details like this with like changing text and status bars, and it makes it look like you are really working hard. We're going to click Finish. Now, one of the first things we're going to do before we actually get into Flutter is we're going to go to the SDK Manager by clicking More Actions on the Android Studio screen. We're going to click SDK Tools. Now, we're going to make sure we select Android SDK Command Line Tools Latest. This is not a step that's required now, but as we get into Flutter, if you don't have these command line tools installed, a lot of things are not going to work and you're probably going to get Flutter Doctor errors. So we're going to click Apply and we're going to click OK. We're going to get this download. All right, it's done, so we're going to click Finish here. We're going to click Apply. And then we're also going to do one more thing while we're in Android Studio so that hopefully we can avoid using Android Studio later. So we're going to click this More Actions button one more time, and we're going to select the Virtual Device Manager. As you may have guessed, this is how you're going to create virtual Android phones and tablets. So we're going to click Create Device. And what I generally do, and this is up to you, but I will generally create a phone Android virtual device and a tablet Android virtual device. So I think what I'm going to do here is I'm going to create a Pixel 5. And what I'm basing this off of is the resolution. So a lot of times when you're troubleshooting Flutter applications, the errors you're going to see are going to be dependent on different screen sizes. And so since I'm going to have a tablet to run tests on, I'm going to choose a phone that's kind of in the middle of the range as opposed just to the largest or smallest phone. And as you get closer to release, you're probably going to want to test your applications on more devices than I'm showing you now. But let's just take the Pixel 5. I'm going to do the Tiramisu Android version, which is Android 13.0. You do have to click download and select this. It is going to take a minute to download. You can see the SDK component installer has finished installing Android SDK 13, which is Tiramisu nickname. Now, in reality, when you're doing a launch application or you're launching an application on the store, you're probably going to want to test it on some of these older SDKs. For our purposes and for development now, we are just going to stick with Tiramisu. We're going to click next. You can name this whatever you want. I'm just going to call it 6-inch phone because it's really not a Pixel 5. And there are some settings here. You can tweak these later. I don't find them all that important, and we're going to go to finish. Now it's going to create the virtual device. Now we are going to do the same thing, but we are going to also create a tablet. Again, I'm going to look for something that's a standard size here, probably a 10-inch tablet. So I'm just going to select the Nexus 10 preset we have here. We're going to click next. We're just going to do Tiramisu with this as well. These two devices are created. So we're going to cancel out of here, and we're going to do one more thing in Android Studio, and this is optional. So one thing we are going to do very quickly while we're in Android Studio, and you probably won't need to use these plugins much, but we are going to head to the plugins page. We are going to search for Flutter, and we're going to install the Flutter plugin, accept, install, and it's going to prompt us to install the Dart plugin as well. So we're going to click Restart IDE, now that these both are done, and we're going to come back to Android Studio. Let's go and do Flutter Doctor again. Wow, you can see there's still a few errors here. Now this is what I mean. Sometimes when you do installs like this in Windows, there's going to be a few more errors than there would be if you were really using Linux or Mac OS. But don't worry, we have solutions to all these. So the first one is no Java development, or JDK as we're going to call it from now on, found. You must have an environmental variable for Java home set. You might remember earlier I said the Java development kit was included in Android Studio, and it is. But there's some sort of strange bug going on in the latest version of Android Studio. You may not need to do this if you do not get this error. But if you get this error, we're going to hit Windows key E. We're going to go to this PC. We're going to go to Program Files, and we're going to go to Android. We're going to click Android Studio. Now I want you to notice two folders. One is called JRE for Java Runtime Environment, and the next one is JBR. Now JBR is right now where the Java Development Toolkit is found. In JRE, this is the old Java Development Toolkit. And you'll notice there's nothing here on a fresh Android Studio install. Okay, everybody, so we're going to need to do what's called create a symbolic link. All right, so to make a symbolic link, we're going to have to open up a command prompt. So again, we're hitting Windows key, typing CMD, and then we're clicking Run as Administrator this time. It's very important because you cannot make a symbolic link if you do not have administrator privileges. So that path we copy and pasted, we're going to hit CD, we're going to hit Control-V to paste it, we're navigating to this path. Now we actually want to be one directory up in the Android Studio directory, so we're going to hit CD, period, to go back to this directory. We're going to hit dir, and you can see this JBR folder is here, and the previous JRE folder that we deleted was here. So what we're going to do now is we're going to type mklink, which is a command called make links, so you can make a symbolic link. We're going to type /d, we're going to type the name of the link, and then the target of the link, which is, again, that path. Then we're going to hit enter. Now, if you notice, we're going to hit dir, and now there's something here called JRE, and you can see it points to that folder. For most applications, they won't notice the difference. They'll just get redirected to that folder. So now JRE is pointing to JBR. Now let's try Flutter Doctor again and see if it resolved the issue that we were previously having. Looks good. All right, so we have a new error here. Some Android licenses are not accepted. So what we're going to do, as you can see, there's a command here, Flutter Doctor Android licenses. So we're going to run that command. We're going to type Flutter Doctor --Android licenses, hit enter, and this is going to prompt you to agree to the Android licenses. Now, you can go read these if you want. I've read them a few times, so I'm just going to hit yes through all of these, go through them all. You can see there's some dating quite a ways back. All right, now we're going to run Flutter Doctor again. Let's see what Flutter says here. Only one issue left. Visual Studio is missing necessary components. Please rerun Visual Studio Installer for desktop. Now you might be thinking, we already installed Visual Studio Code. Well, Visual Studio Code is just a glorified text editor. Visual Studio itself is an IDE, or an integrated development environment, that has more features, but more importantly, it has a few packages we need. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna open up Google Chrome one more time, and we're gonna Google Visual Studio Build Tools 2022. And we're gonna go to this visualstudio.microsoft.com page, and we're gonna go to the download section. We're gonna download the community version because it's free, and we're not enterprise users, I'm assuming. And you can see it downloaded here, Visual Studio Setup. So we're gonna open Visual Studio Setup. We're gonna click yes and give it permission to access our system. We're gonna click continue. We don't need much of this. We can basically uncheck almost all of this except for desktop development with C++. That is why we're installing this. So we're gonna click modify here, and it's gonna install while we're downloading. Now this is one of the reasons I say the Windows install is a little trickier, because you're having to get these packages from all over the place. Like, nobody would expect that you have to download Visual Studio itself and then install a C++ package for this to work, but you do, which is why this video exists. Now please keep in mind, we're gonna put all the links you need in the description, so if you get bored of this video or run out of time, feel free to follow the directions in the description as well. Visual Studio is now installed. Now we don't even need to open up the software or touch it. It's just gonna waste space on your system, but we needed to do it, so we did it. We're gonna close this out, we're gonna close this Chrome window out, we're gonna head back over here and we're gonna run Flutter Doctor again. By the way, if you don't know this already, when you're in a command line, if you just hit the up arrow, you can go back through old commands, which will save you some time. So we're gonna run Flutter Doctor, and let's see, if we don't get any errors here, beautiful, no issues found. That's what we wanna see. So now we're gonna go back to our downloads folder and we're gonna take VS Code, which we haven't yet installed, and this is the final step, believe it or not. We're almost there. We're gonna accept the agreement, because who reads these? We're gonna install it in the default location. Feel free to modify these things. All right, we're waiting on this quick install here. And we're almost there. The first thing we need to do is we need to head on over here to the extensions tab. You can access this by clicking it or hitting Control-Shift-X. We're gonna type in Flutter. We're gonna take the official Flutter install here and click install. Yes, beautiful, it's working. It's just gonna take just a moment or two to install here. It's not a big install. So we're also gonna go ahead and we're gonna look at Dart, which is the programming language that Flutter uses. Now, if you'll notice, when you installed Flutter, it took care of installing this for you. Amazing. Okay, so we've got Visual Studio set up, we've got our Flutter and Dart plugin installed. Now what we're gonna do is we're going to access what in Visual Studio is called the command palette. So you can access this by going to View and selecting Command Palette, or I prefer Control-Shift-P. And we're going to select Flutter, New Project. We're going to select an application. You might be developing a module, package, or plugin later, but for now, we don't need to worry about that. We're going to select this folder called Flutter Test. And we're going to select folder, create the project in. Now, I think I'm going to name this project, let's see if this works. When you name your project, try to name it the project name you're going to want to use. You can always change it later, but it's going to save you some time if you do it right the first time. We're going to hit enter. Now it's very important to select yes, trust the authors, because the Flutter command line application is going to create a lot of files for your Flutter application that you're building. So we're going to click yes, we're going to wait. You can see all the files here. Now the most important one and the files you're going to edit are going to be found in the lib folder. And you can see we have lib main.dart here, which has a little program with comments. Do not worry about understanding this yet. We're going to go to terminal. We're going to create a new terminal. Again, I generally don't use PowerShell, but it's what we have. So we're going to type Flutter run. And you can see we have the option to run Windows, Chrome, or Edge. Now, I don't have an Android virtual device or an iOS virtual device because this isn't a Mac and I don't have virtualization supported, given that this is running in a virtual machine, but still we can see the power of Flutter and make sure it's working. So first, we're going to hit 1, and this is going to create a Windows application, not a web application, not a mobile application, but an actual Windows application that, if you were so inclined, you could deploy to the Windows App Store. Now look at this. This is an actual Windows application of the Flutter demo. This is not a very exciting application. In fact, all it does is increment when you press the 1 button. But you'll notice this is a native Windows application. So we'll close this out. We're going to run Flutter run again. Now let's see. Wait a minute, can we actually run this in Chrome? Are you telling me we can make a web application from the same code that we just made a Windows application? It's impossible. Or is it? Well, what's this? We've got a Chrome browser coming up linked to a local host service, which has the exact same application. Now you'll notice if you view page source, there's not a lot of code there. It's really interesting how Flutter works. We'll get into that later, but I wanted to show you two things. First, it is so powerful as a multi-platform tool. And second, we now know that our Flutter install is working perfectly. Now, if your install isn't working, please let us know in the comments so we can try to help you figure out what's going wrong in as much detail as possible. Now, my name is Jeffrey Booth. Thank you so much for joining us on our channel. Thank you so much for watching our videos and putting up with our funny, hilarious skits that we throw into them for seemingly no reason. Please let us know what you'd like to see next. Have a great day and enjoy Flutter.